Welcome to another episode of Fill in the Blank podcast. I'm here with Evan and Gabe.
Hello.
So, we're here to talk about ice famine. What comes to your mind when I say ice famine?
I don't know, Doc. She's just always so cold when I talk to her.
That's a good interpretation of it, though. Like, maybe like a psychological, like, reference or theory that, like, being distant or cold.
I think he was just being a douche.
Yeah, probably. Well, let's talk about ice famine. Ice famine, in my mind, comes to a place where we're running out of ice. Now, what comes to your mind when I say running out of ice? Do you think that's something we can ever run out of? I mean, it's on our Earth, too.
Yeah, but it's also finite.
It's hard to think you can't go down to the freaking.
Well, then again, it's not really
We'll
finite.
never run out of ice, but
we can run out of water.
when you say running out of ice, I think of the icebergs that are potentially.
Yeah, but we talk about running out of water to drink, and people are dying of dehydration because they can't find water, even though they might be in the middle of the ocean somewhere. But we can't drink that water without something processing out all the salt that's in it.
Yeah.
So you got to think, what happens if we can't make ice? We can't just eat glacier ice. You can't do that. You can't. It's not like the movies. You can scrape off into your drink or scrape off into your cold. Oh, I got nice, refreshing snow cone off the glaciers of Himalayan icebergs. It's like, no, you can't do that. So when we talk about the ice famine, an ice famine was a scarcity of commercial ice, usually during the hot summer months. Common before the widespread use of a refrigerator, it often resulted in the widespread spoilage of food and medicines, in some instances in death from heat stroke. So some instances where ice famine actually occurred throughout history. In 1918, ammonia was diverted to manufacturing munitions, which led to a shortage of commercial ice. Harvesting of natural ice and storage for summer was increased. In 1911, Eastern North America had a heat wave where we ran actually out of ice. So many people are like, it's hot, I need ice, but we don't have any. You're literally dumping it into your cup before your refrigerator can process it. So next thing you know, you go to fill up ice, and you can't have a nice cold glass of lemonade because Johnny used all the ice to take a bath. So, history. In the 19th and early 20th century, ice was a very high demand in America. A man named Frederick Tudor, dubbed the King, or was known as the Ice King, brought forth a whole industry for ice. It was a necessity for many businesses who sold food and homes who hoped to preserve their food because the refrigerator and freezer were not yet invented. The people's only choice were commercial and residential ice boxes that need to be replenished every time there was a drop in temperature. Now, if you look at food markets, like frozen fish markets or something like that, there's ice there. All that available ice. Imagine having a scarcity of it. You cannot sell your food, and it's going to go rotten, and it's going to basically start stinking up the place and not be usable. All that time and effort and all that money lost because the fridges and freezers were not invented yet. So if you look at that, try and think of running out of ice. Imagine what we use with ice and how simply, like, we go to dump it into our glass, we get too many cubes in there, and some fall on the floor. You just don't even worry about it. It's going to melt. There's a time where people were worried about that ice that would melt on the floor. Like, people would be like, no, I wasted an ice cube. And it's like literally like taking a ruler to the freaking hand. It's ridiculous. It's hard to think that ice, something we use so commonly. Like, imagine no ice cream.
Yeah, it's such a... It's almost an ancient problem now, because refrigerators are so ubiquitous.
Yeah, we always have freezers. We always have a way of freezing water.
Yeah.
So once his ice had chilled the drinks and preserved the food of many Americans, it quickly became a high desired commodity. And the commodity was supplied by ice harvesting, which was done on frozen over fields and bodies of water, as well as ice factories. The former provided most of the ice for the industry, while the latter produced a significantly lesser amount. So the ice market boomed, and ice was being transported from anywhere possible to many cities in the United States. New York City and Chicago were major consumers of American ice because there were higher densities of people and business that highly relied on ice. But many problems arose from the relatively new industry that did not have the best technology to ensure a sufficient supply and that wasted much of an ice during the transportation process. Since the demand for ice was so high in nearly all of the United States, any delay or shortage in supply threatened the people with ice famine. Some of the main causes of ice famines were unreliable trains as modes of transport, ever-increasing prices, and unfavorable weather conditions. Unfortunately, the people who controlled the ice supply in America could not control every variable that helped produce large quantities of ice, so it was never guaranteed that the American demand would be met. So people's need for ice would never be met because of all the things that could possibly go wrong. Much like if you're running a mile, if you can say, I can run 3 blocks 100%, you can't do anything 100%. There's going to be some type, you got to add in a natural disaster or some type of incident that might happen that might stop you from running those 3 blocks. You take a step outside, next thing you know, ice from the sky is now falling, and it causes that 100% to more look like a 52%. Yeah, you can keep running 3 blocks, but you're going to be pelted by ice. And, you know, we know ice to be like, get up to giant size. It could be like Godzilla where that dude gets hit in the head with a giant...
golf-sized hail.
That's not golf that he got hit in the head by. He got hit by the size of a bowling ball. Imagine that coming from the sky and hitting your head. Imagine a little 3-year-old toddler walking outside and just getting pelted with bowling ball ice.
Oh, that's not funny to laugh at, but it's just the image in my head.
It's kind of funny.
The image in my head is just a little kid getting ready to go play outside and just gets
wham! Just fucking head into the
taken out by
ground.
a hailstone.
Skull caved in.
Well, so one of the biggest issues in meeting the demand of ice was the lack of transportation. At this time in America, there was no such thing as refrigerated trucks that can make deliveries via highways. Instead, there was a rail system that ran ice from the mountains to different cities and towns that did not have ice factories or had ones that could only meet some sort of demand. However, these rail systems were also the means of transportation for fruits and vegetables that were not local to the given area. These 3 goods were all in high demand, but train cars could not always be allocated in order to satisfy the demand for all 3 necessities. When fruits and vegetables were priorities, ice companies would have complications getting ample amount of ice out for shipment. The inadequate amount of train cars to meet demand was not only the issue with the rail system, the trains were just unreliable as a whole. On July 4th, 1894, Ann Arbor Argus reported that Chicago had no more than a day's worth of ice for the whole city. This normally would not be a problem with many different means of transportation of shipment, but ice on its way from the train carrying the ice was stuck outside of the city. This posed a problem for everyone in the city because they would not have immediate means to keep their food or meat in Chicago's meatpacking district cold. So all the priority of the food getting there first now can't be kept cold because the ice is the second priority, and now they don't have anything to keep the food cold. So now their food's going to go bad. So that whole first trip seemed like a waste. So another cause, or at least threat, of ice famine was World War I. During the war, the American government needed most of the country's supply of ammonia. Ammonia was a chemical used in ice factories that helped to make the ice and also refrigerated the ice until it was ready for consumption. But America's need for ice was considered insufficient when the American government wanted to go to war. The government ultimately needed ammonia to provide soldiers with sufficient ammunition to fight the war. Since a majority of the ammonia supply was fueling war efforts, ice factories could not generate nearly enough ice to meet the demand. This caused the countryside and cities, especially in New York City, to have small quantities of ice and no ice at all in some areas. In order to help the American people out of the ice famine, the Department of Agriculture released plans to the public that describe how to make and effectively use a homemade refrigeration unit. You know what we used to use on food to preserve it before there was ice and things of this sort? Salt. That's led up to the whole salt war. You know, we literally fought over this thing that you spill over on the side of the table and don't think anything about. The thing you dump too much on your fries, make it extra salty, or put on your potato chips is something that we used to fight and kill people over for. We have the salt wars. Imagine an ice war. People and fighting and literally killing over ice.
We want the cold cubes.
We want the square ones, not the ones that are crushed. You know, you want the cubed ice, not the crushed ice. Now you can literally get it in many forms. This is literally, now what we think about it, we're spoiled. We can get cubed and crushed ice.
We got crushed ice, cubed ice, shaved ice, block ice, sculpture ice.
We're just on another spiral of humanity's advancement.
We use ice for art.
Yeah, we have ice sculptures. We have ice on our wrists.
I mean, what's the benefits? How much of snow or ice do you think of when, you know, you think of your childhood rolling up snow in the yard and making snowmen, and like This whole thing, imagine if there was no ice anymore, the Earth stopped naturally producing ice or snow. Like there was no more of that event happening ever because global warming got too high. Imagine your kids are never going to see snow. Imagine the thing they see in movies and depictions of Christmas and all this stuff is not unreliable to them because they don't know what ice is. How sad would that be? It's like where the polar bear is dying off and it might not be, known anymore. Like later in future generations with global warming on the rise. We know that there was a last glacial period where ice was everywhere. That was the Pleistocene era, so many 10,000 years ago. And now we think about it, like we don't have that. We have snowy places and stuff, but it's the global warming is melting the polar ice caps apparently, and it's hard to think like we've known government bases to be sitting on ice and break off because of melting and stuff like that, and drift off to places we can't reach them. Like we have our technology's not able to go out there. We know this type of stuff. If the Earth keeps warming, it's not a myth. That's something that's actually happening. Global warming is something that is happening. We notice it with the winters sometimes being warmer than it's supposed to, and sometimes it seems like the summers are a little bit colder than they're supposed to. It's hard to really, when it comes to the idea of nature, how far until we might never see ice again?
I think all of this is just a engineering problem. I mean, the 7 billion people need food. The 7 billion people make food, I think I place all my beliefs and cards on the chest of science. I think
you push
just like we pushed through the ice famine, we've developed refrigeration units and stuff like that.
So you think mankind
we're going to push through global warming.
So you think mankind's gonna adapt to the current scenario?
If anything, it'll probably do like biodomes or some sort of like artificial environment.
How long until this Earth isn't stable enough? Are we just going to leave and colonize on the moon or something? But how long
we'll go to another planet and fuck that up.
But if we keep messing that up, we're just creating a never-ending process of this is never-ending repeated motion.
That's why Thanos needed to snap.
You got to put more faith in humanity.
I try to. I push all my chips in on Mother Nature, just coming out with some type of genocide thing that wipes out half the population to kind of refix itself. The Earth will balance itself out, I believe, in a way.
Science will find a way. We'll figure it out.
Well, ice was not only a vital and competitive industry in the 19th and 20th centuries, but also it was a controversial one. In New York City, towards the end of the 19th century, New Yorkers were unhappy with the way the ice industry was being run. According to historian Edward T. O'Donnell, skeptical customers accused ice companies of price gouging and monopolistic practices. The customers seemed to believe that the companies were purposely creating ice famines so that they could hike up the prices. Higher prices left a lot of people without ice, which made summer months very tough. The controversy over unethical practices in the ice industry turned out to be true when New York ice companies formed into what was called the Consolidated Ice Company. The Consolidated Ice Company was by definition a monopoly that controlled everything about the ice industry in the city that consumed most of the ice. They could create an ice famine in whole communities by controlling supply and prices while against few. If any competitor shortly after Consolidated Ice Companies became as powerful as it was, information surfaced about a corrupt politician helping the monopoly come to fruition. The idea that people are now controlling the flow of ice. You can't get this certain ice, so you can't get in the way. Imagine being in a biodome underwater and someone's controlling the tunnel in and out. Some guy just points a gun to it. If someone doesn't do something, then, if someone doesn't do what I want or give me $1 million, I'm going to shoot a hole and kill everybody in this biodome. The idea of control being in someone else's hands. Someone is always looking for control over someone or control over a population where they feel like they have no power in their own life. So it's hard to think now someone's able to take ice away from you and control that. Your kid can't get a cold glass to drink or something and is dying of heat because he can't have an ice pack for his head. He can't heal his wounds because he can't get ice pack to put on. He can't get a bag of frozen peas to put on there. That's just a horrible thing. So we look at the worries of ice famines ended in the early 1900s. At this point in time, refrigerators and air conditioners were being introduced to the market. It did not take long for people to move away from ice-reliant storage of all kinds. In 1927, General Electric became the first company to mass-produce refrigerator units that did not need ice. This ultimately ended the ice famines and the lucrativeness of ice. So that's hopefully the end of the ice period is in the last 1927, kind of when the refrigerators and all this stuff came into being, where we only think of ice to put in our drinks and things of this sort that I can only relate it to, like a slushie. If someone takes away ice, you're just not going to buy a slushie anymore. It might suck for a while, but they're going to give in because they're realizing they're losing money from it. But imagine how fast refrigerators are coming into technology, where like Alexa is able to control your refrigerator. Your TV is now on, or not your TV, your Wi-Fi is now hooked to your refrigerator. So it's like, imagine at one point all the refrigeration companies and air conditioning companies find a way to hack into your systems and shut down all of it, so now your food's going to start going bad, your house is going to be super hot, and now you need to come back to ice, and then they start controlling that. When is it to think that they're not going to monopolize everything and make our lives hell?
Well, our modern government very heavily blocks the development of monopolies like that. You know, where we whenever we spot that kind of thing starting to happen, we're pretty quick to bat it away.
So when it comes to the idea of an ice famine, do you guys believe that it's something we're never going to worry about again, or do you believe one day it's going to roll its ugly head?
I think we don't have to worry about the
I think we wouldn't have to worry about it unless we lost all sense of having electricity.
Yeah, as long as humanity keeps going along our destined route of advancement towards a better future and we don't collapse, I don't think there's ever a chance we're going to have an ice famine.
As long as we don't turn post-apocalyptic, we won't have to worry about ice.
Call it the America's last ice age,
Yeah,
where we
much.
just run out of ice. Well, anybody that wants to look up this episode or do anything more research on the ice famine, it's definitely it's a short read. It's about a page long of information, but it's cool to see that you can really take your thoughts on it as well. It's like, how much do we use ice for? We kind of take that for granted, much like we take water or electricity for granted. We don't really think about all the time and effort that gets put into it and how much we use it every single day. So thanks for listening to this episode of Fill in the Blank, and stay tuned for our next episode.